Final Fantasy VII is a game that everybody knows. It's not only the most popular entry in the franchise, but also one of the most popular and iconic video games ever made. From the unanimous recognizability of its characters, music, how it inspired JRPGs that came after to model their protagonist after Cloud, to Aerith's death being one of the most known spoilers in the gaming zeitgeist. You know a thing or two about this damn game, even if you've never played it or looked into it. Of Final Fantasy VII's many iconic characters, one of the most prominent ones is Sephiroth, the villain who is just as beloved as the protagonist, who has gone on to become one of the most legendary antagonists in video game history. Final Fantasy is a series that is emblematic of my coming of age as an adult, as I got into and fell deeply in love with this franchise in 2021, entering this new chapter of my life with a new selection of games to comfort myself with. When it came time for me to finally play the famous 7, I had a lot of expectations and preconceived bias. I did not hide my initial disdain for the game at the start, as I always found it really annoying how Square seems to only show love to 7 and how, while the other games aren't unknown by any means necessary, I mean this is Final Fantasy we're talking about, everyone wants to keep giving 7 flowers while neglecting other entries in the franchise that are also deserving of the same spotlight in the culture. Booting up 7 for the first time, I specifically thought I knew who Sephiroth was. I mean, how couldn't I? He's everywhere. I assumed he was next in line to become CEO of Shinra Corporations, a rival to Cloud who we would spend the entire game fighting in multiple fights in a similar vein to like Seymour from 10. Imagine my surprise when I played this game and the Sephiroth I thought I knew from cultural osmosis is very different from the one that's actually in the game. Sephiroth is way more interesting than the image I had of him in my head, and I fear that Square Enix is retconning some of his more interesting qualities in favor of having him be this exacerbated, ever-present being that loses the mystery and horror he was originally conceived to bring. Sephiroth is high-key a slasher villain. In many ways, Final Fantasy VII carries this element of horror in its storytelling, and he's primarily responsible for most of it. There's a similarity to be drawn between him and horror icons like Freddy Krueger and Michael Myers. Think about it. In the first Nightmare on Elm Street and Halloween films, their presence is very understated. There's a psychological element to the terror they brought, because they stuck to the shadows, and you didn't see them consistently, making the moments where they do show up and go for the kill even more effective. Despite how fantastical they are as beings, with Freddy being a dream killer and Michael being a physical incarnation of evil itself, they are presented to viewers in a grounded, horrific way that makes them take complete control of their films, and Sephiroth is the same way. Despite how legendary he is and how present his image is in pop culture, spin-offs, and the general fandom, he's really not in 7 as much as you might think. I know I was expecting to see him from 1 hour in and continue seeing him every other hour until the end. It's crazy because you don't actually meet Sephiroth in person until the very end of the game. Up until that point, it's that understated path that the aforementioned Freddy and Michael walk, but even more so. We are introduced to Sephiroth not through a physical encounter, but through discovering the aftermath of his destruction. Hallways covered in blood, corpses strung about the Shinra HQ, with their killer nowhere in sight. Entering the marshes and discovering a Zalem, a giant and ferocious snake-like creature, impaled on a broken tree. When we finally do see Sephiroth, it's not even him. It's a manipulated form of Jenova that's taken form of Sephiroth, meaning that the man Cloud and Co. are physically chasing the entire game isn't even the man himself. On that note, the Jenova clone version of Sephiroth doesn't show up terribly often either, and half of Sephiroth's screen time is in flashback sequences. The devs made a very interesting decision to have the game's main antagonist appear very sparingly across the 60-hour experience, and it really creates a genuinely ominous and unsettling atmosphere around Sephiroth. He feels like a horror villain placed inside of a JRPG, and it's interesting to see his character taken through a similar path of Freddy Krueger and Michael Myers, from an unsettling evil whose presence was intentionally used sparingly to enforce terror on the audience, to a blown-up, characterized version of themselves. Sephiroth is a character that I believe deserves all the love he gets, as he truly is a great villain. His backstory is surprisingly sad, and I say surprisingly because I wasn't expecting him to have a backstory at all. I assumed he was just going to be crazy for the sake of being crazy. While learning how he came to be the person that he is in present day doesn't excuse his actions by any means, I couldn't help but understand him to a point. He is the child of a gross science experiment where his birth mother was injected with the cells of Genova, and Shinra told him that his mother was Genova itself rather than his actual mother, Lucretia. He is raised to be primed as the star soldier of Shinra's military force, and his sheer power and popularity turned him into the poster boy for the company, as well as the go-to soldier for any major problem solving. He ends up finding out his origin as a Cetra, and that the species has been wiped to near extinction, leaving only Genova and himself behind, both of whom are under control of Shinra as sources of power. Realizing that he's been living a lie as a pure human and being used as a guinea pig for Shinra's heavy lifting, he would slip into insanity and go against Shinra, before eventually going against the entire human race. I would have never thought this long-haired psychopath would have a sympathetic angle to his background, and I walked away from Final Fantasy VII really loving Sephiroth as an effective antagonist that went against my expectations in multiple ways. I haven't played Crisis Core yet, so I'm not sure what they add to his character in that game, but going off of the original narrative of 7, he is a very well-made villain that is such a different flavor of evil from the baddie that came before him, Kefka. It's interesting how they went for another understated antagonist in a similar vein to him for the very next game and did a pretty bad job. Guess you can't make magic happen twice. Final Fantasy as a whole is a pretty serious franchise, as every game has its share of drama, death, and explores some deep themes. 7 does a pretty good job at balancing its darkness with silliness, but when things get serious, the game can get really heavy and unsettling, and the tone of the game would not be the same or anywhere near as effective if Sephiroth didn't exist. Now that I've played the game for myself, I totally understand why it's so popular and beloved. It's a great entry in the series and a top-tier JRPG in isolation, and I have no qualms with declaring Sephiroth as one of my favorite antagonists of not just Final Fantasy, but across all games and media period. He is a horror icon placed inside of a sci-fi fantasy JRPG, and deserves all his flowers.